everybody. Welcome to another episode of Transcendence Talks podcast. Today is the start of a special series, and this series is something I've been wanting to talk about for a long time, and I want to frame it really carefully. But this series is going to be about disclosure. This is about expanded states of awareness and making contact with beings who are potentially extraterrestrial. And as somebody who is a licensed professional counselor, it's something that I shy away from because of fear, to be honest, because of fear of losing credibility, fear of judgment. But over the last 3 years or so, I have had so many undeniable experiences. And as I've shared it more privately with close friends, with family, with people that I trust, what I have found is that people are having these experiences all the time. And when you don't have context for these experiences, or there's something that you don't understand, you're likely to dismiss them. So it feels important for me to talk about it now because I want to give context. I want to give a deeper and broader understanding for people who might be having these experiences too and don't know who to talk about it with. Maybe you're afraid that if you talk about it, you will be pathologized. I know that was a fear for me being in the field, right? Personally, as a psychotherapist, I use models that are non-pathologizing. I don't like the traditional system of diagnosis because all emotions really are information that help us understand ourselves, our past, and how we survived, patterns that dictate our behavior. They're just information. And why now? I feel like this conversation is important to have now because we're learning very quickly, 2026, that the world isn't what we thought it was. We're learning that the systems that govern our world are more corrupt than we could have ever imagined. So much of this is coming to light, and we need to be able to balance out the darkness with light. I want to be really clear. I believe in God. I believe in Jesus Christ, and I want to bring those concepts outside of the traditional church. You know, the way that I understand God is the infinite source of all that is. We are literally fractals of the divine, and we're not separate from source creator. And so I believe that every single plant, animal, human is all a fractal, is all part of God experiencing itself to have multiple perspectives. If we are just in a place of infinity, of unity all the time, we don't get to know ourselves because we need resistance to really understand what we are and what we're not. And so I believe we're all just one perspective of creator. And through each and every one of our experiences and stories is the story of God. And I believe that Jesus was an example of what happens when we step into unity consciousness. And I believe that that's our path of evolution, our trajectory. And I'm going to go much deeper into these concepts and clarify more about that as this goes on. But again, I just want to lay some foundational information today, some groundwork, because this is going to be a multi-series podcast. As I tell some of the stories of what's happened as I've had personal encounters with these higher dimensional beings. So what I've come to understand over the years after having these encounters is that these encounters are a result of consciousness. Before I was having these encounters, I was trying to heal my own trauma. I had repressed memories, and as a psychotherapist, somebody who trusts the psychotherapeutic process, I would go to therapy to try to process my trauma and really understand myself. And at the time, I didn't know that I had repressed memories. It wasn't until I started doing psychedelic assisted psychotherapy that information started coming up, repressed memories. And these were pre-verbal. These were traumas that happened to me before I had words. So before the age of 2 or so. And again, I'm going to go a little bit deep into this so you understand the context, because I don't think that these encounters are random. Again, they're a byproduct of consciousness. And when we start to heal our trauma, we start to release density from our system. And as we release density from our system, we're more grounded, more rooted. When we have trauma, it tends to settle in the lower energy centers or chakras of the body. And that creates density. And so as we heal, we release density, we hold more light in our cells, and we're able to explore our upper chakras. If somebody develops their upper chakras, meaning their psychic gifts and their abilities and those things at the expense of not looking at what's below, they become really unbalanced. And that's where we see some of these mental health disorders where people are maybe hearing voices or they're manic and things like that. It's because they haven't dealt with the trauma underlying at the root or in their lower energy centers. And so we see these imbalances expressed as mental health. And so it's very, very important, to do the work in a safe way. And internal family systems therapy, which is the therapy that I use the most, we call this titration, where we can start to very slowly and safely, up to the client's tolerance, work with the traumatized parts and what we call exiles, or the very young parts of us who were wounded that we have created protectors around. So protectors can be firefighters or managers, but we start to have these behaviors that become pushed out of the realm of that they're more exaggerated, and they're exaggerated in relation to the wound of the part of us that's hurting. So managers are parts of us that are proactive, where firefighters are reactive. So let's just say, we had a parent who was very emotionally reactive when we were young, right? If we had a feeling, it triggered that parent. And so we maybe developed a manager that represses our feelings so that we don't get in trouble. Or maybe we have a firefighter, something that gets reactive, where, if the parent's triggered and we don't have a parent who is regulated enough to help us cope, maybe we start eating to numb the feelings, and that would be a firefighter. So these parts are normal, they're natural. We need protectors so that we can get through the human experience and survive the things that we encounter. And when we're little, oftentimes our emotions are too big for us to deal with in that moment. If we don't have a safe parent to help us cope and regulate, we have no choice but to develop these habits. And that's okay. All parts have positive intentions for us and are helping us to adapt and survive to an environment in which we couldn't otherwise adapt or survive. Imagine if we weren't able to dissociate or eat to feel better when we're little. We would be so overwhelmed in our nervous system by the pain that we feel. That is the work that I do as a therapist. It's also the work that I sought out for myself. And I had felt really blocked. It was like I had a part of me that felt like a trapped door. And I'm pointing to my body because it felt like it was below my solar plexus. It was like something right around my sternum, felt really blocked, like I just couldn't access what was underneath that trap door. And so enters psychedelic psychotherapy. This is when, and I write about this a lot in my book, I went very, very deep. I don't know how deep I'm going to get into that here, but I started to have this awareness during a session that I was just loving awareness. And I just kept saying that. I just feel like I am loving awareness. Like there were no words. Usually my mind has a constant dialogue going on. And in this moment in the therapy session, it was quiet. I just felt like pure awareness, observation, and there was a contentness, like a child, like a baby. And then I felt the assault. I could feel the attack on my body as an infant, and I realized I was being abused. And because it was at a time when there were no words, we stored these memories, or I had stored this memory implicitly. An explicit memory is a memory where I could tell you I did A, B, C, and D, and I could tell you in a chronological way. An implicit memory is the way I would tell you, this is how I learned how to ride a bike. And I couldn't tell you how I did it, but my body just seems to remember. And there are feelings associated with riding a bike that help me learn how to do it and then remember that for the future. And so this memory was stored implicitly. I could feel it in my nervous system as almost an imprint. But because I was so little and there was no story to attach to it, no judgments to assign to it, no words, no narrative, it was confusing. So what I felt was just fear and pain and confusion and betrayal. And so I started getting images after I allowed myself to feel the sensations of what was happening. I think it was a feeling that I had never allowed myself to fully feel. My managers were very, very strong. And so as I allowed myself to feel it, now it was as if two realities were happening simultaneously. There was me as an infant having this confusing experience that I couldn't run away from or protect myself from, that was absolutely overwhelming. And then there was the adult me giving witness to this child. And the facilitator said, "What's happening? Tell me what's happening." And so I told her, and she told me to name it. Who's doing this to you? And so I, to my own shock, named the person, who was somebody in my family. And I didn't want to believe that it was true. And this is where it gets really interesting. I didn't want to believe that it was true because it was too painful to think that that happened. And so as I said, no, it's not true. Maybe I'm making it all up. My body got so tense, and it was like instantly inflammation kicked in, pain kicked in, and I was a very sick child. Migraine headaches. I would be throwing up coming home from school. I had neck pain that was debilitating. I had back pain. My joints were so tight, and from as young as 6 or 7 years old. And so I had a vestibular issue where it appears as a vestibular injury when I've had it looked at. Just some things that I wasn't sure why. I was such a sick child. And it was so interesting because as I denied it in that session, all the old pain and inflammation came up, as if my body was trying to say, look what happens as a result of you suppressing. It causes all this pain. And so when I looked at the facilitator, I said, "So it did happen?" My body would just relax. Everything released. And I said, "I don't want to believe it's true." And the facilitator said, "Well, your body's not going to lie. Look what's happening right now." And she was watching me go back and forth between acceptance and denial. And in denial, there was pain. And in acceptance, it's like everything would clear and I would get so calm and my body would relax. I got another piece of information in that session that would be relevant later, which is that my grandfather used to have affairs. And so I didn't know what to do with that information because I was like, well, I'm not going to make any accusations against anybody who I don't know if it's true or not. And so I sat with that. I wrestled with that for a while. But what I can tell you is there was a freedom that I have felt inside of me that felt completely new. And so just to kind of explain a biological process of what happens when you start to clear trauma, there is something when you're really little, when you're older, when you have high stress situations or trauma, there's something called a neuropeptide. So a neuropeptide is a signal from your brain that says this situation is too overwhelming for me to process right now. And the body in all its wisdom says, okay, then I'm going to hold on to it and I'm going to store it for later. And the body will store this neuropeptide and connect it or attach it to a cell that is associated with the trauma. So if it's associated with your heart, if your heart felt broken, if you felt betrayed, that neuropeptide is going to connect and attach to the heart. And when something comes up in the future that creates a similar kind of wound, that neuropeptide is going to come up and say, hey, are you ready to process this now? So when we're triggered, it's not just about the present moment. It is fueled by situations that were similar in the past. And the universe or God wants you to heal. So you will be presented with situations that mirror your original wounding so that you have opportunities for those neuropeptides to come up so that you can address them and you can start to heal. That creates inflammation in the body. It starts to, over time, when it's not dealt with through repression or suppression emotionally, start to create physical disease in the body. And so as we really start to look at ourselves and heal our trauma, these neuropeptides come up so they can be witnessed and incorporated back in and released. And this is why when we heal trauma, we see so many people heal physical disease as a response. I have seen people heal things like lupus, things like Lyme disease, things like migraine headaches, things like back pain, things like high blood pressure. I mean, this work never ceases to amaze me. I one time helped somebody heal a seizure disorder. They were having seizures several times a month for months, and it healed after we processed the trauma. So I'm not saying that it happens every time. I'm just saying it's not uncommon. So it's a really amazing thing. And my belief about that, as we start to get a little bit more multidimensional now and kind of bridge these topics, is that when you release that trauma, that density of the neuropeptide, your cell, which carries your DNA, gets free. And when that cell is unburdened, it can hold more light. Your cells emit biophotons of light. But when they're burdened with neuropeptides, they can't emit that light. And so when you wake up your cells, when you clear the density from them, they can start to do what they're supposed to do and emit light. And this is how we start to step into our light body. This is how we start the ascension process. It starts below. First we descend, and then we can ascend. Again, descension is about building really strong roots under the surface so that when the strong winds of your life come, you don't blow over. You need to build that solid foundation. And what I have found is underneath your greatest trauma lies your most potent gift. It is in that cave, the place where you don't want to go, the place where you don't want to look, where you are going to start to find the buried treasure, the things that scare you. Your gifts are on the other side of fear. And I know that sounds really cliche. It does, but it's so true. And so this is how we start to get more conscious and how we start to expand. And this is important now because, again, we're living at a time when new light is coming to the planet, and we are starting to realize our history has been a lie. It's been false. We've been fed false narratives. The controlling entities around the world aren't what we thought they were. And so it's going to be up to each and every one of us to remember that we are sovereign, to take our power back, to overcome fears. And when we really start to look at the way the world works, our fears are not external. They are internal, and they are projected out into our reality. And so when we start to remember our multidimensionality, we start to remember what our true history was. We start to remember things like past lives. We start to have contact with these extraterrestrial beings. And these beings, when you really start to study them, because I'm telling you, the minute I had an experience that I couldn't comprehend, I needed to understand it. I wanted to understand. And so, when you look in the Vedas, when you look at ancient African tribes, there are tribes in Africa who literally knew all about star clusters that weren't discovered until thousands of years later. And they described them all accurately. And they said that the star people told them. The Hopis, the Mayans, the ancient Sumerians, even in the Bible, especially in Ezekiel, the Nephilim. If you look in the ancient texts through all time, history and tradition, they point to the star people. The star people taught us about civilization. The star people taught us about the calendar. The star people taught us how to build these structures. They're painted, they wrote about them, they drew them because they saw them. And so nothing has changed. And we've never been alone. We are not alone. And before I get into more episodes where I really start talking about these disclosure experiences that I've had very intimately and deeply, here's my thought about them. They happen in very high vibrational states of consciousness when your heart is open, and there is a deep sense of love when they're around. There's a deep sense of connection and unity. The first words that they ever told me were, "We are your intergalactic star family, and we have a message for you. Would you like to receive it?" And they asked me permission. They didn't come without my consent. I said yes, and that started a beautiful relationship where I'm still guided by them today, years later. And they have helped me channel books. They have helped me do physical healings on people. They've activated my light language. And what I want to talk about is there's good and bad in every population. But what I've come to learn, what I've come to know in the depths of my heart is that we are all children of God. Everything is animate. Everything on the macro to the micro is sentient and alive, and it is all connected. And I know it's hard sometimes to think of these intergalactic civilizations as like our star brothers and sisters, but that's exactly what they are. And it's so easy to have fear when, as a human species, we still don't know how to love our neighbors. We still don't know how to love the people that the government says should be our enemy, people who think differently than we do. We don't know how to love them. We don't know how to see humans through the lens of unity. And until we can do that, it's going to be very difficult to learn how to love our star family and how to accept them. So we have a lot more work to do. But that's why I want to talk about it, because I want to decrease the fear and the stigma around these experiences. So I hope you enjoy these conversations. I want to wrap this up with the little piece of information that brought everything full circle to me. So, when I wasn't sure if I had been sexually abused as a baby, I did get that other little piece of information that I dropped earlier. And I was told in that session that my grandfather had cheated on my grandmother. That was validated months later. It was validated, which to me validated the other piece of information, because there's no way I could have known either one of those things. And I will tell you that having contact with ETs is an experience of consciousness. It's like seeing a ghost. It's like developing your mediumship. And there is a common thread among all those things, which is learning how to trust yourself. If you are still denying your reality, if you are still seeing the world through the lens of your wounds, and you're denying that there's a problem in your marriage, you're denying that your kids are struggling, you're denying that you hate your job, and you're just suffering through it. When you are not able to look at your world and your reality in an honest way, it's harder to have these experiences. You have to learn how to trust yourself, and you have to see the world how it is, not through the filter of your wounds. So I'll leave you guys with that. I'm really excited to get your feedback. I want this to be a community where we can start to share these experiences, because again, we need to start normalizing them. We need to create community, and we need to work on expanding our consciousness together. There's a book by Hawkins that talks about is power versus force. And he says that as we raise our vibration of consciousness, it literally, just in raising your vibration, it literally starts to cancel out some of the lower vibrational energies and like clean it up. It harmonizes the lower energies on the planet. It cleans up the density. So, in the Bible, it says that everything can change in the blink of an eye. And it absolutely can, because as we collectively raise our consciousness and we neutralize the density of the energies that are lower, we will grow and evolve exponentially. It's going to be contagious, because energy is contagious. So we have work to do. And my hope is to create a community, to create understanding, to create tolerance and love around these topics. And, I want you to come to these conversations with curiosity. Let your curiosity lead. You don't need to believe me. I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. If it doesn't resonate with you, that is okay with me. But I am here to create community for those who want to understand, who are curious, who have an open mind, and who are having these experiences too, and maybe would like safety to be able to process them. So much love. Thanks for being the first audience that I'm really talking about this with. I did share again in my book, Sacred Revolution and Reclaiming Eden, but talking feels different. It feels more vulnerable to me, more vulnerable than writing. So I appreciate you guys for being the first audience that I get to disclose this to, and I'm looking forward to so many more conversations. So like, subscribe, share with somebody who may benefit from this, who is having these kinds of experiences, so that we can all be in this together. All right, guys, until next time.